The planet Kepler 442 hung in space like a blue and green jewel. It was far from Earth, almost at the edge of where humans had traveled. 15,000 people lived there now, building homes and farms under a sun that burned a little brighter than the one they left behind. Lieutenant Commander Jacob Martinez stood on the observation deck of the orbital station and looked down at the world below. He had been stationed here for 2 years now. It was a quiet posting. Most days, nothing happened. A few supply ships would arrive. Sometimes, traders from other species would stop by. The defense station had weapons, but Jacob hoped he would never need to use them. Down on the surface, Governor Helen Brooks was finishing her morning coffee. She sat in her office in the main colony building and reviewed the daily reports. Everything looked normal. The farms were producing well. The school had 80 children enrolled. The medical center had treated nothing more serious than a broken arm in weeks. Helen smiled. This was what she had worked for. A peaceful human settlement where people could live without fear. She believed that humans could get along with alien species. They just needed to talk to each other and find common ground. Her office had flags from 3 different alien civilizations hanging on the wall. Trade agreements and friendship treaties were framed next to them. Helen was proud of those documents. Each one represented hours of careful negotiation. The Vaxorians were one of the species that humans traded with. They controlled 40 star systems and had a military that everyone feared. But they had always been professional with the colony. Cold, maybe, distant, but never hostile. Their ships passed through the system sometimes. Their merchants sold weapons and strange metals in the colony marketplace. Helen thought that as long as both sides benefited from trade, there would be no problems. In a house near the edge of the colony, Daniel Patterson was getting ready for work. He was an agricultural engineer, which meant he figured out how to grow earth crops in alien soil. It was harder than it sounded. The purple-leafed trees that grew naturally on Kepler 442 pulled different nutrients from the ground. Daniel had spent months adjusting fertilizers and irrigation systems until wheat and corn would grow properly. His wife, Linda, was already awake. She taught at the colony school. Today, she would be teaching the children about Earth history. Most of her students had never seen Earth. They were born here or on the colony ships. Linda wanted them to understand where humanity came from, even if they would spend their lives among the stars. Their daughter Amy was 7 years old. She had Linda's brown hair and Daniel's curious nature. Amy loved the colony because there was always something new to explore. The purple forests, the orange sky at sunset, the small animals that looked like rabbits but had 6 legs. Earth seemed boring to her. This was her home. Amy sat at the breakfast table and ate her cereal while her mother packed lunches. Daniel checked his schedule on his data pad. He had to inspect the southern fields today. The crops there were showing some kind of stress, probably a mineral imbalance in the soil, but he needed to be sure. Linda kissed her husband goodbye and walked Amy to school. The morning was cool and pleasant. Other families were doing the same thing. People waved to each other. Children ran ahead and then circled back. It was a normal day, in a place where normal days were precious. Up in orbit, Jacob received a message. A Vaxorian ship was requesting permission to land near the colony. The message said they wanted to discuss expanding trade agreements. Jacob checked the ship's identification. It matched Vaxorian military codes, but that was not unusual. The Vaxorians did not separate their military and civilian functions the way humans did. He sent the request down to Governor Brooks. She approved it within minutes. Jacob cleared the Vaxorian ship for landing and logged the visit in his reports. Just another routine day. The Vaxorian ship landed 5 kilometers outside the colony. It was a standard transport, nothing that looked threatening. A team of 6 Vaxorians emerged. They were tall, with gray skin and 4 arms. They wore what looked like ceremonial armor, decorated with symbols that meant nothing to humans. Their leader was named Zethrak. He had fought in 12 conquest wars for the Vaxorian Empire. He had watched civilizations surrender and planets burn. He thought humans were soft. They talked about peace and cooperation. They built farms instead of fortresses. They let their children play without guards. But Zethrak was not here to trade. He had orders from the Vaxorian High Command. Those orders were simple. Teach the humans a lesson. Show them what happened to species that refused to accept Vaxorian authority. Make it memorable. The Vaxorian Empire had been watching human expansion for years. Humans were spreading too fast. They were too independent. They refused to pay tribute or acknowledge Vaxorian superiority. The High Command had decided this could not continue. They chose Kepler 442 because it was far from Earth, because it was small, because attacking it would send a message that all human colonies would hear. Submit to the Empire or face consequences. Zethrak and his team moved through the forest toward the colony. They stayed hidden. They set up their equipment. They recorded everything. This was going to be broadcast across multiple star systems. Every species would see it. Every species would understand. Back in the colony, school let out for lunch. Amy and two of her friends decided to explore near the forest edge. It was something they did often. Their parents knew they stayed close to the colony. There were no dangerous animals on this part of the planet. The purple trees were interesting. Sometimes you could find strange insects or colorful stones. Amy walked ahead of her friends. She was looking for a specific type of flower that grew in the shade. Her science teacher had said they would study plant biology next week. Amy wanted to bring in some. The weapon fire was silent in the thin air. It was an energy pulse, designed to kill quickly. Amy fell before she could finish her wave. Her two friends screamed and ran. Amy fell before Mauer. Our two friends screamed and ran. They ran faster than they had ever run in their lives, back toward the colony, crying and shouting for help. Zethrak watched the child fall. He felt nothing. To him, this was just another mission. Another message delivered. He had his soldiers record everything from multiple angles. The small human lying on the ground. The other children running in terror. The smoking weapon in his hands. All of it would be broadcast within the hour. In the colony, people heard the screams. Daniel Patterson was in the operations center when the call came through. Two children were crying about something in the forest. About Amy. About weapons. His heart stopped. He ran. Other people ran with him. Security personnel grabbed their weapons. Parents ran looking for their children. Linda Patterson heard from another teacher. She dropped the papers she was holding and sprinted out of the school building. Her mind could not accept what she was hearing. It had to be a mistake. Children got scared. They imagined things. Amy was fine. Amy had to be fine. Daniel reached the forest first. He saw his daughter lying on the ground. The grass around her was scorched. He dropped to his knees and pulled her into his arms. She was still warm. Her eyes were open but seeing nothing. There was a burn across her chest where the energy weapon had struck. Linda arrived seconds later. She made a sound that no human should ever have to make. Other colonists gathered around them. Some were crying. Some stood in shock. Security personnel spread out, weapons ready, looking for threats. Jacob Martinez received the emergency signal in orbit. He immediately went to full alert status. Every weapon system on the station came online. Every scanner began sweeping for hostile forces. He sent a priority message to Earth. They were under attack. Governor Brooks reached the scene within minutes. She saw the Patterson family. She saw the grief and rage on every face around her. She saw what remained of her dream of peaceful coexistence dying in the purple grass. That was when the broadcast began. Every communication device in the colony received it. Every screen showed the same thing. The Vaxorian commander standing over a small body, speaking in his own language. But the translation was clear. This is what happens to those who defy the Vaxorian Empire. This is what happens to those who refuse to submit. You have 24 hours to accept our terms. You will pay tribute. You will accept military occupation. You will acknowledge Vaxorian authority over this world. If you refuse, every human in this colony will share this child's fate. The message showed Amy approaching them. It showed her waving. It showed the weapon firing. It showed everything. The Vaxorians wanted everyone to see. They wanted the fear, but they did not understand humans. They did not understand what they had just done. Daniel Patterson stood up slowly. He laid his daughter's body down gently. Someone brought a blanket to cover her. He looked at the screen showing the Vaxorian commander. His face showed no tears now, just something cold and hard. He spoke quietly, but his words were recorded. They were sent along with the emergency signals to Earth. They spread through human space faster than any official message could travel. They killed my daughter. They murdered a child who wanted to help them. They think this will make us afraid. They think this will make us submit. They are wrong. They will pay for this. Every single one of them will pay. They have started something they cannot finish. Governor Brooks tried to maintain order. She called an emergency council meeting. She knew they had to respond. But she also knew the colony could not fight a Vaxorian warship. They had to wait for help from Earth. They had to survive the next 24 hours. But people were not interested in waiting. The colony's small security force was already arming every volunteer. The civil defense bunkers were being opened. Weapons that had been stored for emergency use were distributed. If the Vaxorians came, they would face resistance. Jacob began moving the orbital station into a better defensive position. He had 4 defensive satellites and a dozen missiles. Against a Vaxorian warship, it was nothing. But he would use every weapon he had. He started running scenarios, looking for any tactical advantage. The Vaxorian ship remained at its landing site. Zethrak was satisfied. The message was sent. Now they would wait for the humans to surrender. It always worked this way. A show of force, a demonstration of power, then submission. He had seen it dozens of times. His soldiers set up a perimeter. They activated their shields. They prepared for the humans to arrive with whatever negotiators they had. Zethrak expected begging, maybe some anger. Definitely surrender. Hours passed. Night fell on the colony. Daniel and Linda sat with their daughter's body in the medical center. Other families came to pay respects. Children left flowers and drawings. Adults stood silently, not knowing what to say. But something else was happening. In orbit, Jacob received new signals. Ships were approaching the system. Not just 1 or 2. Dozens. More were coming from different directions. He checked the identification codes. They were all human. Military vessels. Commercial ships that had been armed. Even private yachts, carrying weapons. The emergency signal had reached Earth. It had reached every human colony. Every station. Every ship. And they were all coming. On Earth, Admiral Richard Cole stood in the command center and watched the reports coming in. He had been a military officer for 30 years. He had fought pirates and dealt with border disputes, but he had never seen mobilization like this. Every captain who could get their ship moving was heading to Kepler 442. The official fleet was assembling, but they would take days to arrive. Civilian vessels were going to get there first. They did not care about orders or protocol. They were going to war. Admiral Cole understood. He had a daughter. If someone had killed her like this, he would have burned worlds. He began issuing orders. Every available warship was to proceed to Kepler 442. Support vessels would follow. This was not going to be a small operation. Captain Susan Drake commanded the battleship Vengeance. It was one of the newest ships in the fleet, built with weapons that had never been tested in real combat. When the orders came through, she did not hesitate. Her crew was already preparing for departure. She knew many of them had children. Some had children at distant colonies. Every parent in human space was thinking the same thing right now. If they could do this to one child, they could do it to any child. This had to be answered. It had to be answered with overwhelming force. Back on Kepler 442, Daniel Patterson finally stood up from his vigil. Linda stayed with Amy, but Daniel walked out of the medical center. People watched him. They knew his face would be the symbol of this moment. The father who lost his daughter to alien cruelty. He walked to the colony's communication center. Governor Brooks was there, coordinating with the incoming ships. She looked at him and saw something in his eyes that made her step aside. Daniel activated the main broadcast system. His message would go out on all frequencies. Every ship approaching would hear it. Earth would hear it. And the Vaxorians would hear it. His voice was steady. There was no crying, no begging, just a father making a promise. They attacked my little girl because they thought it would break us. They thought we would be afraid. They were wrong. To every human who can hear this message, I say, thank you for coming. To the Vaxorians, I say this. You wanted to send a message. Message received. Now here is ours. You will answer for what you have done. All of you. Your empire. Your commanders. Every soldier who stood by and let this happen. We are coming. And we will not stop until justice is done. The message ended. In the silence that followed, people in the colony looked at each other. Some nodded. Some began checking their weapons. The security chief started organizing defensive positions. They knew the Vaxorians might attack before help arrived. They knew they might all die in the next 24 hours. But they were ready. If they died, they would take some of the enemy with them. Zethrak received the message in his ship. He laughed. Humans making threats. It was what he expected. They would surrender soon. They always did. The first human ships arrived in the Kepler 442 system 18 hours after Amy Patterson died. They were civilian vessels, mostly. Cargo haulers that had been fitted with missile pods. Corporate security ships with military-grade weapons. Even some private yachts, carrying torpedoes strapped to their hulls with magnetic clamps. Captain Susan Drake brought the Vengeance through faster than light travel at the edge of the system. Her battleship was massive compared to the civilian vessels, bristling with railguns and laser arrays. Behind her came 12 more military ships, destroyers, frigates, and 2 more battleships. The official Earth Defense Fleet had arrived, but they were not alone. Over 200 ships now filled the space around Kepler 442. More were arriving every hour. Jacob Martinez watched from his orbital station and felt his chest tighten. He had never seen so many human vessels in one place. They came from mining colonies, trading stations, and frontier settlements across 50 light years. On Earth, the response went beyond military mobilization. Every news service broadcast the Vaxorian recording. Every channel showed Amy Patterson's final moments. People watched a 7-year-old child die for nothing more than being human and being in the wrong place. The outrage was total. Protests formed outside Vaxorian trade offices. Human corporations immediately severed all business relationships with any company that dealt with the Vaxorian Empire. Diplomatic channels went silent. Every human ambassador to neutral stations where Vaxorians operated withdrew within hours. But the real response was happening in secret. For years, human intelligence services had been placing assets throughout explored space. Sleeper agents in key locations. Hidden weapons platforms in supposedly empty systems. Backdoors in communication networks. It was preparation for a war that everyone hoped would never come. Admiral Cole activated it all. Every agent received their orders. Every hidden platform came online. Every piece of intelligence that had been gathered about Vaxorian military positions was pulled from classified archives and distributed to fleet commanders. The Vaxorians had 40 star systems. Human intelligence now knew the location of every military shipyard, every training facility, every fleet anchorage, and every command center in those systems. The information was years in the making. It was about to be used all at once. Captain Drake established herself as fleet commander in the Kepler 442 system. She was senior officer present, and she took control of the assembled ships with quick efficiency. Civilian captains who had never taken military orders in their lives snapped to attention and followed her commands. She organized the fleet into battle groups. The military vessels would form the main attack force. Civilian ships would provide support and protect the colony if any Vaxorian reinforcements arrived. Every captain received tactical data. Every weapons officer ran final checks. Drake opened a channel to the Vaxorian ship on the surface. Her message was simple and direct. You have 5 minutes to power down your weapons and surrender. After 5 minutes, we will open fire. There will be no negotiation. There will be no second warning. You killed a human child. You will answer for that crime. Zethrak received the message in his ship. He looked at his soldiers. They were ready to fight. The ship's shields were at maximum. Weapons were armed, but he looked at the tactical display and saw the number of human vessels surrounding his position. He sent a response. He did not beg. Vaxorian warriors did not beg. But he tried to explain. He was following orders. The High Command had authorized the action. He was just a soldier doing his duty. Drake's response came back in seconds. Her voice was cold. Following orders is not an excuse. You pulled the trigger. You killed a child. Your time starts now. The 5 minutes felt like hours. Zethrak considered his options. He could surrender and face human justice. He could fight and die with honor. He could try to escape, but the human fleet surrounded the planet. He made his choice. He was Vaxorian. He would fight. The 5 minutes ended. Drake gave the order. Fire. The Vaxorian ship had good shields. They absorbed the first wave of missile impacts. But then, the railguns opened up. Solid projectiles moving at a fraction of light speed. They punched through the shields like they were not there. The Vaxorian ship broke apart in seconds. Zethrak died with his soldiers. The ship's reactor went critical and left a crater 100 meters wide. The purple forest burned. Jacob watched from orbit and felt no satisfaction. One ship destroyed. One small group of murderers dead. But the empire that sent them was still out there. That was when Admiral Cole's message reached the fleet. It was broadcast on all channels. Every human ship received it. Every captain heard the words that would define the coming weeks. Find every Vaxorian military installation. Destroy them all. This empire wanted to send a message. Now we send ours. They will never threaten a human child again. The fleet began to disperse. Captain Drake took one task force and headed for the nearest Vaxorian shipyard. Other groups moved toward different targets. The plan was simple. Hit every military target simultaneously. Give the Vaxorians no time to organize a defense. The Vaxorian High Command received reports of human fleet movements and initially dismissed them. Humans were emotional. They would strike a few targets and then calm down. Negotiations would follow. Tribute would be paid. The natural order would restore itself. But then the attacks began. Human ships appeared at a Vaxorian training facility and reduced it to debris in minutes. A weapons depot was destroyed by long-range missiles. A fleet anchorage found itself under assault by 30 human vessels. The attacks were coordinated across multiple star systems. The Vaxorians had 300 military ships, but they were spread thin across their empire. When they tried to concentrate their forces, human intelligence knew about it. Attacks shifted to new targets. The Vaxorians were always one step behind. What shocked the Vaxorian military most was human tactics. They had studied human warfare. They knew humans preferred defensive strategies. They knew humans avoided civilian casualties. They knew humans always tried to minimize damage. But that doctrine was gone. Human ships fought with no hesitation and no mercy. Damaged vessels did not retreat. They kept fighting until they were destroyed, or until every weapon was fired. Human pilots flew suicide runs against targets 10 times their size. The Vaxorians had never faced an enemy that simply did not care about losses. The technology was the other shock. The Vaxorians discovered that humanity had been holding back. Weapons they did not know humans possessed began appearing in battle. Electromagnetic pulse devices that shut down Vaxorian systems. Cyber warfare programs that turned Vaxorian ships against each other. Nuclear-pumped lasers that cut through armor like it was paper. One Vaxorian commander sent a desperate message to High Command. The humans are not fighting like we predicted. They are not trying to win territory. They are trying to destroy us completely. Every ship. HFY. HFY. Every base. Everything military. What do we do? The High Command tried to respond. They sent peace envoys to neutral stations. They offered reparations. They suggested negotiations. Every offer was rejected. Human ambassadors delivered the same message everywhere. There will be no peace until the Vaxorian military is destroyed. There will be no negotiations until every war criminal faces justice. On Kepler 442, life tried to return to normal. The colony held a funeral for Amy Patterson. Thousands attended. Daniel and Linda stood beside a small grave marked with a simple stone. People from across the colony came to pay respects. Even Jacob Martinez came down from his station to attend. Governor Brooks gave a speech. She talked about innocence lost and the price of peace. She talked about how the colony had wanted to believe in cooperation between species. She talked about how that belief had cost a child's life. Daniel Patterson spoke last. His words were recorded and sent across human space. They became famous. They were taught in schools and military academies for generations. My daughter loved this world. She loved exploring and learning. She thought everyone could be a friend. They killed her for that. They killed her to send a message. Well, here is my message back. We will never forget. We will never forgive. And we will never let this happen again. Every parent in human space should be able to let their children play without fear. If we have to burn an empire to make that true, then so be it. The words reached Admiral Cole on Earth. They reached Captain Drake in battle. They reached every human soldier and sailor fighting across 40 star systems. The message was clear. This was not about territory or politics. This was about children being safe. This was about making sure no parent ever had to bury their child because of alien cruelty. The Vaxorian Empire began to collapse. Systems on the frontier declared independence. Species that had been conquered generations ago saw their chance and rose up. The Vaxorian military, being systematically destroyed by human forces, could not suppress the rebellions. The Vaxorian homeworld sent increasingly desperate messages. They offered complete surrender. They offered to disband their military. They offered anything humans wanted. But human forces kept coming. The attacks did not stop. Finally, the Vaxorian High Council did something they had never done in their empire's 1,000-year history. They sent an envoy directly to Earth to beg for mercy. The envoy was an elder named Crethus. He had been a war master once. The Battle of Vaxoria Prime began on the 74th day of the war. Captain Susan Drake brought a fleet of 150 ships to the Vaxorian homeworld. It was the largest concentration of human military power ever assembled for a single engagement. The Vaxorians had gathered their remaining forces to defend their home. 80 warships, everything they could still field, formed a defensive line. Orbital defense platforms bristled with weapons. Millions of Vaxorians on the surface watched the sky and waited. Drake opened a channel to the Vaxorian commanders. Her message was broadcast to the entire planet. We did not come here to destroy your world. We did not come to kill civilians. We came for justice. Surrender your military vessels. Surrender the members of the High Command who ordered the attack on Kepler 442. Surrender the war criminals. Do this. and your world survives. Refuse, and we will take what we came for by force. The Vaxorian fleet commander was an old warrior named Quelthix. He had served the Empire for 60 years. He knew this battle was hopeless. The human fleet outgunned his forces 3-1. Human ships had already destroyed half of his empire's military. But he was Vaxorian. He would not surrender. His response was to open fire. Missiles launched. Energy weapons lit up the darkness of space. The battle for the Vaxorian homeworld had begun. The human fleet split into 3 groups. One moved to engage the Vaxorian ships directly. One began destroying the orbital platforms. The third stayed in reserve, protecting the capital ships and watching for any surprises. The Vaxorian ships fought well. They were disciplined and brave, but they were also outmatched. Human railguns fired solid metal slugs that punched through shields and armor. Human missiles swarmed in coordinated waves that overwhelmed defensive systems. Human cyber warfare teams hacked into Vaxorian computers and shut down entire vessels. Quelthix watched his fleet die. Ship after ship went silent. He saw a destroyer break in half from railgun impacts. He saw a cruiser explode when its reactor was breached. He saw escape pods launching from dying vessels. The humans let them go. They were not targeting escape pods. They were only destroying military assets. He made his final decision. He broadcast on all frequencies. All Vaxorian ships, cease fire. We surrender. Shut down your weapons. Shut down your shields. It is over. The battle ended. 60 Vaxorian ships were destroyed or disabled. 20 survived and surrendered. The orbital platforms were all gone. Human ships now controlled the space above Vaxoria Prime. Drake sent a landing force to the surface. Marines in combat armor secured the main government building. They found the High Council hiding in a bunker beneath the city. The council members were old creatures who had ruled an empire through fear and violence. Now they faced human justice. The arrest of the High Command was broadcast across the galaxy. Images of Vaxorian leaders being led away in restraints appeared on every news service. Species that had feared the Vaxorians for generations watched and understood. The empire was finished. But humanity's work was not done. Task forces spread across the former Vaxorian territory. Every military installation was catalogued. Every weapon was seized or destroyed. Every warship was either captured or reduced to scrap. The process took weeks. Human forces were thorough. They found hidden arsenals. They discovered secret shipyards. They located training facilities that had been disguised as civilian structures. Everything military was systematically eliminated. Meanwhile, human diplomats worked with freed species. The Vaxorians had conquered dozens of worlds over the centuries. Those worlds were now independent. Human advisors helped them establish governments. Human engineers helped rebuild infrastructure damaged in the rebellions. It was made clear that humanity was not there to replace the Vaxorian Empire. They were there to end it. On Earth, preparations began for the war crimes trials. The charges were simple: murder of a civilian, targeting of a child, broadcasting the crime as propaganda. The evidence was the Vaxorians' own recording. There would be no question of guilt, but there were questions about what to do with an entire empire. The Vaxorian species numbered in the billions. Most of them had never fired a weapon or supported the attack. They were just people living their lives under a government they had no power to change. Admiral Cole addressed the Sol Defense Council on this issue. His recommendation was direct and clear. We destroy their military completely. We dismantle their government. We ensure they can never threaten anyone again. But we do not punish the species for what their leaders did. We are not them. We do not kill children to make a point. We provide humanitarian aid. We help them rebuild as a peaceful society. We show the galaxy what human justice looks like. The Council agreed. Human aid ships began arriving at Vaxorian worlds. They brought food, medicine, and construction materials. They helped establish new governments based on democratic principles. It was made clear that humans would be watching. Any return to military aggression would be met with immediate force. On Kepler 442, Daniel Patterson stood in the rebuilt section of forest where Amy had died. A memorial had been placed there. A simple stone with her name and dates. Other colonists had added flowers and small toys. It had become a place of reflection. Governor Brooks joined him. She looked older now. The war had changed her. Her belief in peaceful coexistence had not died, but it had been tempered. She understood that peace, sometimes, had to be enforced. "Daniel," she said quietly, "the trials begin next month. They want you to testify. To speak for Amy." He nodded. "I will be there. Everyone will hear what they took from us. Everyone will hear what their empire cost." The trials were held on Earth at the International Justice Facility. Judges from multiple human nations presided. The defendants were the surviving members of the Vaxorian High Command, and every soldier who had participated in the attack on Kepler 442. The prosecution presented the evidence. The Vaxorians' own recording played in the courtroom. Amy Patterson, walking forward, her hand raised to wave, the weapon firing, her falling. The silence that followed was total. Daniel Patterson took the stand. He spoke about his daughter, her curiosity, her kindness, her belief that everyone could be a friend. He spoke about what the Vaxorians had taken from the galaxy when they killed her. She was 7 years old, he said. She had her whole life ahead of her. She could have been anything. A scientist, an artist, a teacher like her mother. We will never know, because someone decided her life was worth nothing. Because someone thought killing her would make humanity afraid. They were wrong about us. And they were wrong about her. Her death did not make us weak. It showed us what we were willing to do to protect our children. The trials lasted for months. Every defendant was found guilty. Sentences ranged from life imprisonment to execution for the actual killers. The Vaxorian High Command members who had ordered the attack were all sentenced to death. Human justice was carried out swiftly, but the real impact of the trials was what they showed the galaxy. Humanity did not torture. They did not engage in collective punishment. They did not kill civilians in revenge. They followed their laws. They documented everything. They gave defendants representation and fair hearings. Other species watched and took notes. This was not the behavior of a species driven by emotion. This was calculated justice. It was somehow more frightening than simple rage would have been. Humanity could be provoked to total war, but they would not abandon their principles even in that war. Captain Drake returned to Earth after 6 months in Vaxorian space. Her ship had seen heavy combat. The Vengeance bore scars from energy weapons and missile impacts, but it had survived. And so had most of her crew. She was promoted to admiral and given command of the new Frontier Defense Fleet. Its mission was clear: patrol human colonies. Ensure that what happened to Kepler 442 never happened again. Show the galaxy that human settlements were protected. Jacob Martinez also received a promotion. He was given command of the new defense station at Kepler 442. It was 10 times larger than the old one. It had weapons that could destroy a fleet. And it had a crew of 500 who took their mission very seriously. The Vaxorian homeworld struggled to adapt to its new reality. The military was gone. The government was gone. They had to build a new society from scratch. Human advisors helped, but the work was slow. Generations would pass before Vaxorians fully understood what their empire had cost them. In military academies across human space, the war became required study. Officers learned about rapid mobilization, about asymmetric warfare, about the importance of intelligence preparation, but they also learned the strategic lessons. Never underestimate an enemy's emotional response. Never target civilians as a strategy. Never assume that showing cruelty will produce submission. The Vaxorians had made all three mistakes. Their empire paid the price. Alien civilizations that had been neutral during the war, 5 years after Amy Patterson died. The galaxy was a different place. The Vaxorian Empire existed only in history books. The species survived, but they lived under strict conditions. No military beyond basic police forces. No expansion beyond their home system. Regular inspections by human observers. It would be generations before anyone trusted them again. Daniel Patterson stood on the observation deck of a transport ship and looked down at Kepler 442. He was returning home after spending 2 years on Earth. He had become an advocate for colonial defense, working with the military to ensure every human settlement had adequate protection. His testimony before the Seoul Defense Council had led to major policy changes. Linda had stayed on Kepler 442. She still taught at the school. But now she also ran a foundation in Amy's name. The foundation provided education and support for children on frontier worlds. It was her way of making sure her daughter's death meant something. The colony had grown. 25,000 people lived there now. New families arrived every month, drawn by cheap land and opportunities. The memorial to Amy had become a central feature of the settlement. School children learned her story. They understood why the defense station in orbit was so large. Jacob Martinez had retired from active service. He now trained new officers at the academy on Earth. He taught them about defensive strategies and the psychology of deterrence. His most famous lecture was titled, "Never Again," and it covered the failures that had allowed the attack on Kepler 442 to happen. But his students also learned about what happened after. How humanity had responded. How a small frontier colony had become the spark that reshaped galactic politics. Jacob made sure every officer understood the responsibility they carried. They were not just defending territory, they were defending people. Captain Susan Drake, now Admiral Drake, commanded the Frontier Defense Fleet from her flagship. She had 30 battleships under her command and hundreds of smaller vessels. They patrolled the edges of human space, showing the flag and reminding everyone that human settlements were protected. She visited Kepler 442 twice a year. It was important to her. This was where it had started. This was where a child had died and an empire had fallen. She met with the Patterson family each visit. They never spoke about the war. They talked about Amy. About the girl she had been. About the future she should have had. The galactic political situation had stabilized. Species that had been conquered by the Vaxorians were now independent and thriving. Some had joined together in new federations. Others remained proudly separate. But all of them remembered that humanity had freed them. That created a network of goodwill that human diplomats leveraged carefully. Not everyone was happy about the new order. Some species thought humanity had overreacted. They argued that destroying an entire empire over one death was excessive. Those arguments died quickly when someone would ask, "Would you want to be the next to test human resolve?" The war crimes trials had concluded 3 years earlier. The last executions were carried out. The Vaxorian High Command members who ordered the attack were dead. The soldiers who fired the weapons were in prison for life. Justice, by human standards, had been served. But Daniel Patterson did not feel satisfied. Justice could not bring his daughter back. It could not undo what happened. It could only ensure that the guilty paid for their crimes. That was important, but it was not healing. He found healing in other ways. In his work helping colonies prepare defenses, in watching other children play safely, in knowing that Amy's death had changed things. No other parent would lose a child the way he had. The galaxy had learned its lesson. Governor Brooks had retired. The new governor was a former military officer named Paul Henderson. He believed in Helen's vision of peaceful coexistence. But he also believed in maintaining strong defenses. The colony had both now. Trade flourished, but the orbital defenses could destroy a fleet. The Vaxorian people struggled with their new reality. They had been a warrior culture for 1,000 years. Now, They were forbidden to have a military. Many young Vaxorians felt lost. They had no empire to serve, no conquests to pursue. They had to find new purpose. Some found it in helping the species their empire had oppressed. Vaxorian engineers worked on rebuilding projects. Vaxorian teachers helped establish schools. It was slow work, building trust after generations of fear and hatred. But some progress was being made. Others could not adapt. There were Vaxorian extremist groups that talked about restoring the empire. They planned attacks on human targets. They dreamed of revenge. Human intelligence monitored them carefully. Every plot was discovered before it could be executed. Every extremist group was infiltrated and neutralized. The message was clear. Humanity was watching. Any attempt to restart the old ways would be met with immediate force. The Vaxorians would remain peaceful, or they would be made peaceful. On Earth, a permanent memorial was built. It listed the names of everyone who had died during the war. Amy Patterson's name was first, carved in stone at the entrance. Beneath it were words that Daniel had written. She was 7 years old. An empire died because they forgot she mattered. Millions of people visited the memorial each year. School groups came on field trips. Veterans came to remember fallen comrades. Parents came with their children to teach them about the cost of peace. The memorial had a room dedicated to the civilian cost of the war. Human casualties in the fighting. Vaxorian civilians who died in the rebellions. The freed species who suffered during their liberation. War had a price, and the memorial made sure no one forgot that. Daniel visited Earth's memorial before returning to Kepler 442. He stood before his daughter's name and thought about the 5 years since her death. So much had changed. The galaxy was different. Humanity was different. But Amy was still gone. He placed a flower beneath her name. A purple flower from Kepler 442. The kind she had been looking for when she died. He did this every year. It was a promise that she would not be forgotten. And the center. And the center. That her death had meaning. The transport ship landed on Kepler 442, and Daniel walked out into the purple afternoon. Linda was waiting for him. They embraced. And for a moment, neither spoke. Then she led him to the memorial site. It had grown. What started as a simple stone now included a garden. Purple flowers from the native forests mixed with flowers from Earth. Families came here to reflect. Children left drawings and toys. It was a place of peace. The school group that Linda taught was visiting the memorial. 20 children, all around Amy's age. They sat quietly as Linda told them the story. Not the details of violence. They would learn those when they were older. For now, she told them about a girl who loved to explore, who thought everyone could be a friend, who changed the galaxy by being kind. One little girl raised her hand. Why do we remember her so much? Lots of people died in the war. Linda knelt down to the child's level. We remember her because she should still be here. Because what happened to her was wrong. And because people decided to make sure it never happens again. That's why we have the big defense station. That's why there are ships protecting our colony. So you can play and explore and be safe. The children nodded. They understood in the way children understand. The details would come later. For now, they knew they were safe. That was enough. Admiral Drake's fleet continued its patrols. They investigated every suspicious contact. They responded to every distress call. They made sure every human colony knew that help was always nearby. The fleet had become a symbol, not of aggression, but of protection. Other species began requesting human assistance. Pirates troubled their shipping lanes. Could human ships help patrol? Tensions with neighbors threatened to escalate. Could human diplomats mediate? The galaxy was learning that humanity could be a force for stability. But everyone also remembered what happened when that stability was threatened. The Vaxorian Empire had been powerful. They had controlled 40 star systems. They had 300 warships. It took humanity 3 months to destroy them completely. That memory kept the peace more effectively than any treaty. 10 years after Amy's death, the galaxy marked the anniversary. Every major news service ran stories about the war and its aftermath. Historians debated whether humanity's response was proportionate. Politicians discussed the lessons learned. Military analysts studied the tactics that destroyed an empire. But on Kepler 442, the day was quiet. The colony held a simple ceremony at the memorial. Daniel and Linda Patterson stood with Governor Henderson and Admiral Drake. Thousands of colonists attended. They observed a moment of silence. Then children from the school sang a song about hope and peace. Daniel spoke briefly. His hair was gray now. The years had marked him, but his voice was still strong. My daughter has been gone for 10 years. Not a day passes that I don't think about her, about what she might have become, about the life she should have had, but I also think about what her death accomplished. No parent in human space has to fear what Linda and I feared. Our children can play and explore and be safe. That was bought with blood and tears. The galaxy paid a terrible price to learn that lesson. I hope they never forget it. The ceremony ended. People returned to their lives. Children went back to playing in the purple forests. The defense station orbited overhead. Human warships patrolled the system. Life continued. In alien capitals across the galaxy, diplomats and military commanders marked the anniversary in their own ways. Some held memorial services. Some issued statements about peace. But all of them understood the real message. Humanity had drawn a line. Cross it at your own risk. They would go to any length to protect their children. They would burn empires. They would reshape the galaxy. They would never stop until justice was done. The Vaxorian people marked the anniversary too. It was a day of shame for them. A reminder of what their empire had done. Of the price they paid for following leaders who valued conquest over compassion. Young Vaxorians learned about Amy Patterson in their schools. They learned what happened when you forgot that other species valued their children as much as you valued yours. Some Vaxorians made pilgrimages to Kepler 442. They came to the memorial and left offerings, flowers, written apologies, promises to be better. Daniel and Linda never met these visitors. They did not want to. But they knew it was important. The Vaxorian people were learning. Slowly, painfully, but they were learning. 20 years after Amy's death, Daniel Patterson died peacefully in his sleep. He was 73 years old. He had spent half his life working to ensure no other parent suffered what he suffered. His funeral was attended by thousands. Admiral Drake came. Governor Henderson spoke. Veterans who had fought in the war saluted. Linda continued their work. The foundation grew. Schools were built. Defense systems were improved. She lived another 15 years, always working, always remembering. When she died, she was buried next to her daughter. The memorial expanded to include both of them. 3 graves now. A family torn apart by violence, but a family whose loss had changed everything. 50 years after the attack, the generation that remembered it directly was dying off. But the story was taught in every human school. Children learned about Amy Patterson. They learned about the war. They learned about the price of peace and the cost of justice. And they learned about humanity's greatest strength. Not their technology, not their tactics, but their absolute commitment to protecting the innocent, to ensuring that children could grow up safe, to making the galaxy understand that some things were worth any price. The memorial on Kepler 442 still stood. It would stand for centuries, a reminder of one little girl who loved exploring, who thought everyone could be a friend, who died because an empire made a terrible mistake, and the galaxy never forgot. Remember the child. Those 3 words carried more weight than any treaty or military threat. They were a promise. They were a warning. They were the foundation of a new era of peace. Peace enforced by the memory of a 7-year-old girl who should still be alive, who should have grown up and had children of her own, who should have seen the stars and all their wonders, but who instead became the reason that other children could. The story of Amy Patterson was not a happy one, but it was an important one. It reminded everyone, human and alien alike, that actions have consequences, that some lines should never be crossed, that humanity would never forget what was done to one of their children, and in the end, that memory kept the peace better than any weapon ever could. Duddenly became very interested in human friendship. Trade agreements were signed. Defensive pacts were proposed. Species that had once looked down on humans now sought alliances. The phrase, "remember the child," entered common usage in galactic politics. It was shorthand for understanding that some lines should never be crossed. Some actions would produce responses all out of proportion to the original offense. Humans had drawn that line at their children. Everyone understood now. On the first anniversary of Amy's death, Kepler 442 held a memorial service. Thousands attended. Daniel and Linda Patterson stood beside their daughter's grave and accepted condolences from strangers. People came from across human space to pay respects. Admiral Cole gave a speech that was broadcast across the galaxy. He spoke about the price of peace and the cost of justice. He spoke about what humanity had learned and what they hoped others had learned. "We did not want this war," he said. "We wanted to build our colonies and raise our children in peace. That was taken from us. We responded with everything we had, not because we are violent, not because we enjoy war, but because some things are worth fighting for. Our children are worth fighting for. If the galaxy remembers nothing else about this war, remember that. Humanity will go to any length to protect the innocent. Test that at your own risk." The memorial ended with a moment of silence. All across human space, people stopped what they were doing. They thought about Amy Patterson. They thought about what her death had cost the galaxy. And they thought about what kind of future they wanted to build. But now he was just an old creature trying to save his species. He stood before the Sol Defense Council and made his plea. "The war has to stop. You have destroyed our military. You have freed our conquered worlds. You have won. Please, no more killing." Admiral Cole stood to respond. He was not a politician. He was a military officer. But his words carried the weight of every human who had seen Amy Patterson die. "You came to a peaceful colony. You killed a child to make a point. You broadcast it like you were proud. You thought we would be afraid. You thought we would submit. You were wrong. We are not done yet. When every war criminal is in custody, when every weapon is destroyed, when every conquered species is free, then we will talk. Until then, the war continues." Krethis left Earth knowing his empire was finished. The species would survive. The homeworld would survive. But the empire was dead. Humanity had killed it in 3 months. But something made him check his sensors. Ships were entering the system. A lot of ships. More than there should be. He frowned and ran a detailed scan. His expression changed. That was too many ships. That was an entire fleet. No, more than a fleet. Hundreds of vessels, all converging on this system. All broadcasting human identification codes. For the first time, Zethrak felt something he had not felt in years. Doubt. Maybe humans were different. Maybe they did not surrender. Maybe this demonstration of power had been a mistake. He sent a message to the Vaxorian High Command. The response took hours. When it came, the orders were clear. Hold position. Reinforcements were coming. The Empire would crush this human response and show the galaxy that Vaxorian power could not be challenged. Zethrak prepared his soldiers. They would fight. They would win. They had to win. The alternative was too terrible to consider. Thing interesting. That was when she saw the ship. It was partially hidden by trees, but the metal hull reflected sunlight. Amy was curious. She walked closer. Maybe it was a new type of supply ship. Maybe whoever was flying it needed help. She called out to her friends. They came running to see. 3 human children, standing at the edge of the forest, looking at a Vaxorian military craft. Zethrak watched them through his recording equipment. He saw the opportunity. This was even better than what he had planned. Not just humans. Human children. Young ones. Helpless. He activated his weapon systems. His team moved into position. The cameras were recording. Everything was ready. Amy took another step forward. She raised her hand to wave. She was going to ask if they needed anything. She was 7 years old and thought everyone could be a friend. Zethrak gave the order. What happened next would start a war.